Welcome back to Tanya in 5. Today, we recap letter 28 of book 4 of Tanya, Iggeret HaKodesh. This letter is a letter of consolation and comfort that the Alter Rebbe wrote to his dear friend, colleague, and mechutan. Mechutan means the Alter Rebbe's child married this friend's child. And this being Rabbi Levi of Berditchev, this famed Berditchever Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe is comforting him for the loss of his son, the Tzaddik Rabbi Meir. Now, the Alter Rebbe explains as follows. There are two types of sin which had two different types of atonement in the times of the temple. The first is one who sinned accidentally. For that, one would bring a sin offering. Now, what this means spiritually is, when a person sins accidentally, this is the animal soul behaving normally. The animal soul, as it's designed, is driven by self-interest, and sometimes it gets accidentally ends up doing something it's not supposed to, motivated by self-interest. No malicious intent, just accidentally stumbled upon something that was forbidden just because it's behaving normally and acting in self-interest. And therefore, one needs to bring a sacrifice, an offering. The spiritual idea of the sacrifice is that one offers their, quote, animal soul, their human soul, the part of them that acted naturally and mistakenly, incorrectly, that should be offered and brought closer to God Himself, and thus correcting the mistake. Now, the second kind of sin is a deliberate sin. Now, when a person does a deliberate sin, it's no longer the animal soul behaving naturally and accidentally stumbling upon that which is incorrect. Here, the person intentionally decided to take himself away from divine desire and actually go against God's desire. This is already something unnatural. Even for the animal soul, it isn't normal, as it were, to decidedly choose on its own to go against God intentionally. And therefore this requires a much deeper and much more transcendent form of atonement. Namely, the atonement must reach a level of divine that transcends the system. The person stepped out of the normal bounds of the system by choosing to deliberately sin, and therefore his atonement must reach the level which transcends the divine system, at which God says, I forgive because I transcend. And this is represented by the sprinkling of the water of the red heifer. You see, intentional sin is akin to death, in that it is a complete removal from the source of life, from God, willingly doing so. And thus, the sprinkling of the red heifer, which atones for or cleanses one who comes in contact with death, is symbolic of or embodies a level of connection to God that transcends the system and thus can atone even for intentional sins. Now, continues the Alter Rebbe and says, the life of a tzaddik is parallel to the red heifer. The life of the tzaddik who loves God so deeply and thus dedicates himself to God in a way that is, so to speak, not normal. It's beyond the regular, serving God in a kind of normal fashion, but this is a dedication that goes beyond normalcy. Out of this intense love of God daily, Shema twice a day, and during his Torah study all day, he completely devotes himself beyond the normal measures of human beings to just dedicate himself to God completely. And thus, says the Alter Rebbe, when the righteous pass on, and all of the work they have done in their entire lives to elevate themselves and connect to God in this intensely transcendent fashion, draws down blessings of atonement and blessings of salvation, even for those who intentionally sin. And this is how the Alter Rebbe consoles his friend for the loss of his son, the tzaddik. The takeaway from all of this is two things. Number one, we have to marvel at what kind of Jews we're talking about here. where one friend consoles the other friend by talking about the spiritual accomplishment of his son's life and the spiritual accomplishment of his son's death, and that through his son's death, his son is drawing down blessing for those who intentionally sin. Now, the second thing perhaps we might take away is the following. We each can look into our own selves and our own lives and think about the two types of sin here. The unintentional sins, when we accidentally do the wrong thing, and when that happens, we need to realign ourselves to bring an offering to offer ourselves closer to God. But some of us might be able to look into our lives and identify, God forbid, that which is intentional sin. Now, if that's the case, I'm not suggesting we could become a tzaddik on the level of Rabbi Levi, son, but we can find ways in which we can dedicate ourselves to God in that which is beyond normal, beyond our comfort zone, which we've decided for ourselves is normal, and say we're going to dedicate to God beyond that. And that will counter the times when we behaved abnormally by stepping out and intentionally transgressing against God. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude Letter 29.